Our gospel lesson today is from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 13, verses 24 through 43. Jesus put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field. But while everybody was asleep, an enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat, and then went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared as well. And the slaves of the householder came and said to him, "Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from?" He answered, "An enemy has done this." The slaves said to him, "Then do you want us to go and gather them?" But he replied, "No, for in gathering the weeds you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time I will tell the reapers, 'Collect the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn.'" Then he left the crowds and went into the house. And his disciples approached him, saying, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field." He answered, "The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed are the children of the kingdom. The weeds are the children of the evil one. And the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. Just as the weeds are collected and burned up with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will collect out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all evildoers. And they will throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Let anyone with ears listen." The botanical garden of Padua, Italy, is believed to be the world's oldest continuously cultivated garden. Situated on property owned by Benedictine monks, it was created in 1545 so that university students could learn to properly identify medicinal plants, which up until then had been a pretty dicey and free-spirited proposition. When plants are all the medicine you have, you must be able to identify which ones are helpful or harmful in various situations. Over the last 478 years, this garden in Padua has come to include plants from all over the world and played a key role in understanding many exotic species. Now, I imagine, of course, that this garden is very beautiful, probably very well ordered with even rows of plants and careful landscaping. And I imagine that devoted gardeners walking through the botanical garden of Padua might exclaim, "This must be what heaven is like." We do that, of course. We imagine heaven as a place, and we compare it to the most beautiful places that we can think of. But when Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven, which in Matthew he does quite a lot, he doesn't say it's like a place at all. He says things like, it's like yeast, or it's like a mustard seed, or it's like a treasure. Or often it's like a person and that person's experience. For example, today, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field and to all that follows. There is a garden in this story, but the kingdom of heaven is not so much like the garden itself as it's like the person who grows it and everything that happens in the experience of growing it. The kingdom of heaven is like the whole story, in which the master sowed good seed in his field, and then while everyone was sleeping, an enemy came and sowed the field full of weeds. And when the weeds sprouted along with the wheat, the servants, who perhaps have never worked in a garden before, are surprised. "Master, you sowed good seeds. Where'd these weeds come from?" "An enemy," says the master. "Shall the servants then defeat the evil designs of the enemy by immediately tearing out the weeds?" "No," says the master. For in gathering the weeds, you would uproot the wheat along with them. Evidently, the wheat and the weeds grow so closely together that their roots are entwined. So let them grow together, and at harvest time we'll sort it out. And later the disciples come to Jesus and ask him to explain the story. Although the disciples call it a parable, Matthew's Jesus treats it more like an allegory, less mysterious and open-ended, more cut and dried. Everything in the story stands for something else. The sower of good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The good seed are the children of the kingdom. The weeds are the children of the evil one. The enemy who sowed them is the devil, and the harvest is the end of the age. Now, the reason that I went to the internet and searched for oldest continuously cultivated garden, you didn't think I just knew about that garden, did you? If that harvest in this story is the end of the age, then this field that is the world has been growing for many, many generations. The weeds and the wheat of this field were not sorted out when the first generation of Christians died. They weren't sorted out when the monks who planted the Garden of Padua died, or when the members of the ancient Moravian unity died. The weeds and the wheat were still growing together when the first Moravians of Salem were gone, and they were still growing after your great-grandparents were gone, and they are still growing together now. Assuming the end of the age is the end of all time, while the harvest has not come. So, thinking of the long wait for the harvest, I went to the internet hoping to find an image of a garden that has been growing for generations or even centuries. Isn't it funny that the oldest garden turned out to be a place where different kinds of plants have grown together over centuries just so that people could learn to tell them apart? That seems like an important mission. If the different plants must grow together till an end-of-age harvest, shouldn't we spend the time learning to discern which ones it is safe to chew on while we wait? Understanding the different kinds of plants might at least help us identify invasive species before we invite them to invade. Kudzu is all over the American South because planting it here seemed like a good idea in 1876, when people in the United States got excited about using this Japanese plant as an ornamental. But the planters did not consider how the non-native species might take to the American environment, which, as it turns out, was like gangbusters. If the weeds in your wheat field are kudzu plants, the weeds are going to win. Or consider poison ivy. The first written account of the plant, I had a great time on the internet writing this sermon. The first written account of the plant was from the English explorer John Smith himself in 1624. He spoke of how the plant causeth redness, itching, and lastly blisters. He must not have had a very bad case of lastly blisters, though, because he complained that poison ivy hath got itself an ill name, although questionless of no ill nature. By 1640, poison ivy berries had been collected and sent to England to be cultivated. It seemed like a good idea at the time. I have heard it said that this story of weeds and wheat is a warning against being judgmental. I've heard that if the wheat and the weeds in the field of the world are the children of the kingdom and the children of the evil one, then the wheat and the weeds must be people, all the people alive on this earth right now, and it is not for us to judge them. It will all be sorted out at the end of the age, and by the way, those of us who think ourselves wheat might turn out to be weeds. Fair enough. But while the master tells the servants not to uproot the plants, I don't see anywhere in the story that he tells them not to pay attention to the differences between them. The servants have already noticed that some of the plants are weeds. The master just tells them not to pull the weeds up, because in doing so, they'll pull up the wheat as well. And another thing, Since the harvest is not till the end of the age, maybe whatever's growing in the field of the world is something that lives longer than a generation of people, longer even than many generations. Maybe this story is not only about the individuals around us. Maybe what's growing in the field of the world is something much bigger and much older than individual human beings. Maybe the story has something to tell us about whole human societies, hundreds and even thousands of years old. Maybe it also has something to say about the ideas that shape those societies and sometimes outlive them. Which idea is the wheat, and which idea is the weed? What mistakes have we made failing to discern over centuries between benefit and pestilence? How do we deal with the consequences of embracing what seemed like a good idea at the time? The field is the world. And could the children of God's kingdom be all God's good ideas for human life, seed from the fertile soil of God's imagination? If we think of the parable this way, then it urges us to continual discernment, an effort to recognize the good plants so that we can try to cultivate them. They compete for space in a soil that has always been full of other seeds as well. You know this. The weeds have been there all along because the mortal world has always been seeded with both life and death, blessings and curses. How among these do we recognize the good ideas of God? By their fruits shall we know them. Fruits like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. If the good ideas and the bad ideas must grow together, we do well to learn to tell them apart. An idea that seemed good at the time of sowing may grow into monstrous vines, choking out the life-giving plants, dropping poisonous seeds that live in the soil for generations. And then a reckoning will be demanded. The defeat of the Third Reich was such a reckoning for Germany. The downfall of communism was such a reckoning for Eastern Europe. The current attention to our sinful history of racial oppression is such a reckoning for America. I wrote and preached this sermon in July of 2020. I promised you there would be summer reruns. This is one. And in the 3 years since, I have only become more convinced that we have reckonings to come. And here is one more possibility to consider. Maybe the end of age doesn't have to be the end of time. As historians see it, many ages of human society have already come and gone, and each one has involved some sort of reckoning. During 2020, I read an article about how the Black Plague of the 14th century spurred social change that brought an end to the Middle Ages. The author wrote, "Like wars and depressions, a pandemic offers an X-ray of society, allowing us to see all the broken places. When people confront their failures, they have the opportunity to mend them." Maybe harvest follows harvest, and the weeds and the wheat get sorted out over and over. It is a great mystery how weeds and wheat grow so closely together that to uproot the evil might be to damage the good. It suggests a complexity to human society, indeed to the human heart, that only heavenly reapers can ultimately untangle. But just because we let the weeds grow with the wheat doesn't mean we have to swallow everything they produce. It also does not mean we have no defenses against the weeds. Can't we always sow more wheat? Sow and sow and sow until the bad seed no longer has any room to grow. And maybe instead of sending poison ivy berries off to others for cultivation, we can work to stop the spread of that seed. Surely there are ways of keeping back the weeds until all the causes of sin are finally collected and burned in the fire. Maybe that is an idea whose time comes over and over. The botanical garden of Padua is beautiful, but it is not what heaven is like. The kingdom of heaven is not like any place. The kingdom of heaven is like the master who sows a field with love and hope, the enemy bent on destruction, the servants who try to make the right choices, the wheat and the weeds allowed to grow together. The kingdom of heaven is complex, full of challenge and mystery and surprise, all leading to harvest and the shining triumph of God's very best ideas. The kingdom of heaven is like the whole story. Let anyone with ears listen. Amen.